Hi guys, we're moving on today to our next section, which is 2-3. 2-3 is solving multi-step equations. So on our first day, we did equations that could be solved with one step of math. Yesterday, we did solving equations that had two steps of math, usually adding or subtracting, followed by multiplying or dividing. Today, anything goes. We're not going to count how many steps it takes. We're just going to keep going until we get our answer. In our first video, we're going to focus on problems that have parentheses in them. Just like the last 2 days, we're going to put a nice red line going through the equal sign so that we can very clearly see which side is the left side and which side is the right side, so that we remember that when we're moving things from one side to the other side, we have to do it once on each side of that red bar. Now, in this problem, we put some parentheses, which we haven't really dealt with yet. When you see a question that has parentheses in it, your first instinct should be to distribute. So we want to distribute first. Because distributing is just simplifying one side of the equation, I'm just going to distribute on the right-hand side of this problem. I don't need to distribute anything on the left-hand side. We're not going to use that once on the left, once on the right thing, because we're just simplifying one side. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take my 12, and I'm going to distribute it to the 3, and distributing is multiplication, and I'm going to distribute it to the x as well. Now, I'm back to where we were yesterday, which is a two-step problem. Now, this problem is pretty tricky. One of the things that's difficult about this problem is that my variable is on the right-hand side. Sometimes that can trick us a little bit because we're used to it being on the left-hand side. The other thing that's tricky is that my variable is not the first thing on the right-hand side. It actually goes number and then variable. Now, yesterday we learned that you always want to move your adding and subtracting first. This can be deceptive because when I'm just glancing at this problem, it looks like I'm subtracting a 12. But that doesn't mean I'm going to move my 12 first. What you need to do is you need to look at the relationship between the number and the letter. If a number is right next to the letter X, that means that it's connected by multiplication. And so even though this 12 is being subtracted, the way that it's attached to the letter X is multiplication. And so I'm not going to move that 12 first. Instead, I'm going to pick the number that's on the side with the variable, but that's the furthest away from the variable. So focusing on my right side, because that's where my letter X is, the number that is furthest away from my letter X is this number 36. And so my next step will be to get rid of the number 36. The other thing that can be kind of confusing about this problem is we see a subtraction sign, so we might want to add. But this subtraction sign, it's connected to the number 12. It is not connected to the number 36. If I were to add 36 on both sides, plus 36 and plus 36, well, then I would need to add these 36s together, which is 72. And it doesn't cancel out the 36. Well, that's not good. I want the 36 to go away. So just be a little bit careful with that. When you have a problem like this, the minus sign is attached to the number immediately after it. That means that this 36 with no symbol in front of it is a positive 36. And so to get rid of a positive 36, I'm going to subtract it. And notice that 36 minus 36 does actually cancel. We don't need to add them together to get a new number, all right? So just be very careful with your symbols. Recognize what symbols are attached to what numbers. Also notice that I did carry this minus sign down with the 12 because I said the subtraction sign was attached to the 12. So it's a negative 12 down here. And I'm now ready to move my 12. My 12 that is right next to my X, it's being multiplied. And so to get rid of it, I'm going to do the inverse of multiplication, which is division. Again, I'm not going to add the 12 because the 12 is attached by multiplication. It's all about how it's connected to the letter X. So I'm going to divide by negative 12. And I get my answer. I do like to write my letter on the left, so I'm going to switch it around. X equals -2. Don't forget, if you're not sure about your answer, you can always take it and you can plug it back into the original question and see if it works. It works if you get 60 equals 60. All right, let's do one more example together, and then you'll be able to start your homework. In this second example, again, we're doing distributing. I'm going to draw that red bar right down the middle so that I can very clearly see the left side and the right side. And again, because I see my parentheses, I will be distributing. Be careful when you're distributing a negative. -8 times 2x becomes a -16. And then -8 times a -1, you will end up changing that sign as well, and it'll become a +8. So whenever the number that you're distributing is negative, then the signs inside the parentheses will change. Next, I'm going to move my adding and subtracting. So remember, if a number is right next to the letter X, that's being multiplied. So this 16 is being multiplied. The 8 has some space in between. It goes X plus 8. Since there's some space in the middle, we will subtract the 8 as our first step. Next, I will be dividing by 16, -16, just like we did on the last problem when we divided by the -12. Now, 28 divided by 16 is not a whole number. So we want to leave it in fraction form, especially when you're working your way through Delta Math. Delta Math prefers fractions, but it wants simplified fractions. We want to get it as small as possible. So I am going to simplify this fraction. When you're simplifying a fraction, you're going to try to find a number that the top and bottom numbers can both be divided by. You want to try to find the biggest number, so you only have to divide once. So I know that 28 and 16 are both divisible by 4. So I'm going to divide by 4. You do need to keep the negative sign as part of your answer. You can even move it up top. That's a little bit more normal. What we're used to is if we write it up top. So for my final answer, I'm going to put -7/4. Sometimes it's not good to write the negative in front of the fraction bar because it kind of blends in with it and they kind of blur together. So again, if you want to put that negative sign up top with a 7, that would also be okay. -7/4. Now this one gives us a pretty decent decimal, so if you wanted to type it in as a decimal, that would also be appropriate. I'm just going to make sure I get the right decimal. No shame in using a calculator. So it's still -1.75. If you type it into your calculator and it gives you a decimal that takes up the entire screen, then you definitely should not write it as a decimal. You should leave it as a fraction. Fractions really are the more exact and better way to write our answers. Now, if you did not know to divide by 4, maybe you just saw that they were both even. You could also just divide by 2. Okay, divide by 2, divide by 2, and that's going to give you 14/8. Now, whenever you're simplifying, you should take a look at your next fraction and ask yourself, can I simplify this some more? So sometimes the fractions can be simplified more, and this one can. So I would divide by 2 again because these are both still even, and eventually I would get that 7/4, and 7/4 cannot be simplified more. So when you're simplifying fractions, just make sure you're simplifying them completely, as much as possible. Sometimes you can do that in one step, other times it'll take you multiple steps. This concludes our first video.